Hello, Redemption Church. My name is Brandon Henderson, and today we're going to be covering Ecclesiastes, which is a part of the wisdom literature. Goes alongside with Proverbs, the book of Job. And while Proverbs teaches about the pursuit of wisdom and how it can lead us, almost in a linear fashion towards a better life, Ecclesiastes is one of those books where it basically takes that message and it essentially just flips it upside down. And before we get into what this book attempts to convey to us, there's definitely some things that we need to take in consideration to enhance our understanding. So this is where we get to do some of the deep dive type of stuff that Josh has been talking about in his series on hermeneutics. If you watch Pastor Josh's sermon workshop, this is where that type of extracurricular activity can really help us learn more and get closer to the meaning that we really should get out of this. So most importantly is just understanding the importance of the choice of the words that go into this book. So if we open up our Bible, so right now I'm using the NIV. So the way Ecclesiastes opens up is, in the words of the teacher, son of David, king in Jerusalem, meaningless, meaningless, says the teacher, utterly meaningless, everything is meaningless. And then he'll go through and talk about wisdom being meaningless, pleasure is being meaningless, toil is meaningless, advancement is meaningless. And if we take it just from that standpoint, and then so that Bible version, the NIV, uses meaningless. My wife uses the New American Standard Version quite a bit, and the ESV. So in some Bibles it says vanity. So we could read it just at face value, and we'll just think that the teacher is trying to tell us that, these things are meaningless. So despite what Proverbs says, attaining wisdom is meaningless, or attaining wisdom is vanity. And if we take it just from that point, we're only getting just a part of the information that he's trying to convey. So the original Hebrew word that they're using is a word, hevel. So what that means literally is smoke or vapor. So when he says wisdom is meaningless, he's not saying, when he says wisdom is hevel, he's not trying to say wisdom is meaningless or wisdom is vanity. He's really trying to depict the fact that wisdom, like many aspects of life, is it can be fleeting, it can be confusing at times, and just like smoke, we can see smoke, but when we try to grasp it, it'll just slip through our fingers. And when we're surrounded by smoke, it's the only thing that we can see, and we can't see beyond it. So one of the other things, and we'll come back to this, but one of the other things we also need to understand, we don't need to, but it kind of helps us understand this book a little bit more, is that there's two people that are involved in this book. One being the author, who only shows up in chapter 1, verse 1, chapter 12, starting at verse 9 towards the end. So it's only a few verses. So there's the author, but then there's the teacher. So the teacher is labeled as a king, a son of David, and when it comes to the scholars, they argue if it's Solomon or if it's a later descendant who adopts a Solomon-like writing style. So me not being a Bible scholar, usually what I typically do is I'll just take a poll and say, like, how many say this, how many say that. I would say most of them would agree that it is Solomon, but really, for our perspective, since we're trying to understand his message, we just need to understand that he is very wise, he's a king, he's very successful, and because of his authority and position, he's experienced almost everything that can be experienced in his life. He's had multiple wives. He's experienced the best food, the best experiences in life, and now he's basically at the later stages of his life, and he's coming to the term that he's facing the march of time. So he's experienced all these things, but he's got to the point where he can see the inevitability of his own death. And hence why he can use, or he discusses certain things like death as the great equalizer, because here he is a great man, but no matter what, he's going to end up just like the poorest man in his kingdom. And what does it mean to experience all of these great things when that is taken into consideration? So, so he's really trying to get us to understand that when we take in consideration both the march of time and both the fact that there's randomness in life, that the things that we see as important, he's basically deconstructing them to show that those things we find value in, over the scope of time, they may not mean much. I mean, this is why in the beginning of the book, he'll talk about these great things you can do, and then he'll equate it to, in the scope of a mountain, what does it mean? Like, we'll come and go, 100 times over, but the mountain will still be there. And he takes these things that we do on our day-to-day basis, whether it's work, eating, whether it's enjoying life, and he'll just equate it to these big, grand things, and just, that's his way of basically highlighting the hevel in our life. And essentially what he's trying to get to is that work for work's sake can lead to emptiness, and pleasure for pleasure's sake can lead to emptiness. And personally, going through this book, I have seen this in my own life. So I'm a neuroscientist, and I've seen a lot of situations. There's men I deeply respect, or men and women I deeply respect, that are extremely successful. They're the leaders in my field. They're in their 50s, their 60s, and their 70s, and they're at the top of our game. But when you look at their lives, they're basically alienated. And when you think about, or when you learn about how that's happened, some of these people have foregone their personal relationship because they just completely pursue their profession. They completely pursue their advancement in their field, and they've made choices day by day by day, choosing work over, time with a spouse, time with a child. And when it comes down to it, multiply that over a scope of decades, and they're essentially alone. And that is a great example of what the teacher is trying to say, that work for work's sake is meaningless. When we come down to how he's highlighting the randomness, what he's trying to say is that we can follow the conventional wisdom of life that will lead us to, a stable foundation, so we can save money, we can put away for our retirement. But in the scope of things, we really don't know what's going to happen. So whether we're working a 9 to 5 at Tutors, or whether we're a famous cardiologist, or even like a U.S. senator, we don't know what life is going to deal us in the next minute, hour, week, or month. We can be humming along, everything is fine, and all of a sudden, our spouse is sick. Our kids can be in a car collision, or a global pandemic can hit, and then everything gets turned upside down. This is the situation that we're in, and a lot of us are in different situations. We've done the things we were taught to do that were wise, and we found that, in a situation like this, we're not pandemic proof. Jobs have shut down. Some jobs are still shut down, even with the country opening up, and we're just in this tailspin of, what do we do? We did the right thing. We followed the conventional wisdom, but we're still struggling. And this is one of the things that the teacher is trying to get to. And hence why he really uses the word hevel, because he doesn't, once again, he doesn't want us to think wisdom is meaningless. He doesn't want us to think work is meaningless. He just wants to convey that it is hevel, that it can slip through our fingers. And he's trying to highlight the fact that really what we need to understand in the ups and the downs is that we're not in control. God's in control. So we've got to this, and this is one of those reasons why some scholars have said this is the hidden wisdom of the book. Because when it comes down to it, it's hard for us to process a lot of this darkness that he brings to light in this book. Because the things that we hold important, our kids, our work, our jobs, when he just simply casts them out as hevel, and especially if we read it under the assumption of our American translations as vanity or meaningless, it's hard for us to process that, and we can miss the wisdom that's in this book, especially since it's only peppered in certain sections. There's not one section that says, here's all the good stuff that comes from the book of Ecclesiastes. No, it's a lot of hard truth peppered in with the wisdom that comes into it. And then the author comes in. So I mentioned that the author is there at the beginning and then comes in at the end. So he even acknowledges that this is a hard truth. So this is what he says at the very end. If I find my place again. So here we go in chapter 12, starting in verse 11. So the words of the wise are like goads, their collected sayings like firmly embedded nails. So really what he's trying to say is, first of all, what's a goad? So a goad is a sharp prodding instrument shepherds use to prod their herd so that they're going in the right direction. So he's acknowledging that this is hard, but he's equating it to it being necessary to lead us into the right direction. Personally, this is something I definitely need to know, because as I've said, it's common for people in my field to basically devote themselves to their profession and lose connection with their family. This is something I need to hear on a regular basis, that what I'm doing is hevel, and I need to follow some of the words that he highlights. So I mentioned that there's some light that's peppered in here. So one of the things that really brings me hope in this book is in chapter 9, starting in verse 7. Go eat your food with gladness and drink your wine with a joyful heart, for now is that God it is now that God favors what you do. Always be clothed in white, and always anoint your head with oil. Enjoy life with your wife, with whom you love. And it goes in also to then circle back to some of the deeper and darker things that's coming into, but that's one of those things that it really shows that we have to the teacher is trying to convey, we accept the hevel, we accept the fact that life is confusing, life can be random, and that God is in control, but in that time we should hold on to the things that are good. So we should enjoy time with our spouses, we should enjoy the time that we have with our kids. We should go out with our friends and we should enjoy food together. We shouldn't forego those things. But as he says, anything can be hevel. That pursuit of, enjoying food with your friends, that could be hevel. Enjoying time with your wife, that can be hevel. Our kids can be hevel, because we can forego healthy relationships as just devotion to our kids. That can be hevel. What he's trying to say is that under the scope of God, we need to trust him, we need to follow him, and we need to obey his laws in the context of the fact that what we do can lead us to the point where we overindulge in one or two or three aspects of our life. So also, what the author, who's summarizing the things that the teacher is saying, he comes back to end with, just a simple, straightforward word. Um, Fear God, keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. For God will bring every deed into judgment, including every hidden thing, whether good or evil. So in this, I think the author is trying to acknowledge the fact that you've got through this book that's very deep, very dark, and still very confusing. And he wants to basically boil it down to the fact that that still, despite all of this, that we need to trust in the fact that because life is random, these things are going to be accounted for by God. So whether it's justice or injustice, there's going to be a point where God's going to basically take care of that. And the hevel that's in our life, he's going to basically clear that out. So a lot of the things that scholars also have emphasized when it comes to this book of Ecclesiastes is that it's highly personal. There are certain things that I saw specific to my life going on right now. And, many devotionals, they try to give you, like, this is the one thing you should take from this. But a lot of scholars that I've been reading have essentially said this is one of those books where you need to take the time to read it and to meditate it. And then, yes, it's hard, but, that's one of the beauties about having community, which I know is difficult now, being some of us are still basically following a stay-at-home protocol. But this is one of those things where if you can, read it, meditate on it, and do it with someone that you're in relationship with, and basically process it together. And I highly encourage you to do that. And so God, I pray that this book can bring light to those around us. I pray that it can bring healing to West Virginia, our state, and our nation. And I pray, Lord, that you can use this to build us up as a church and as a community.